the widow who opened her door in a blizzard and changed 2 lives forever. The knock came so softly that Abigail Mercer almost let the wind carry it away. Outside, the Wyoming night was white with snow. It pushed against the windows, slipped under the porch boards, and wrapped the lonely ranch house in a cold so deep it seemed to have teeth. The lantern over the kitchen table shook each time the wind struck the wall, throwing pale light across the empty chair where her husband used to sit. Abigail stood still with one hand on a flour sack, listening. There it was again. Not the barn gate, not a loose shutter, not the old cottonwood branches scraping the roof. A knock. 3 small sounds on her front door. No traveler with sense would be out in such weather. No neighbor would cross the ridge after dark. And yet someone was standing on her porch in the worst storm the valley had seen since Christmas. Abigail wiped her hands on her apron and looked toward the rifle above the hearth. She did not reach for it. She had lived alone for 5 years, and loneliness had taught her caution, but grief had not made her cruel. She lifted the latch. A man stood there, bent under the snow. His hat was gone. Ice clung to his dark hair and beard. His coat hung heavy on his shoulders, soaked through and stiff at the edges. One gloved hand gripped the porch post like it was the last solid thing left in the world. His other hand pressed against his side, not like a man hiding a wound, but like a man trying to keep himself standing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The stranger raised his eyes. They were tired eyes, sunken from cold and pain, but still clear enough to show shame. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough as dry bark, "I saw your lamp." That was all. No story, no begging, no name. Just 5 words and a body near breaking. Abigail looked past him into the storm. The road had vanished. The barn was only a dark shape beyond the yard. Snow blew across the porch in hard little bursts, gathering around the man's boots. She thought of her husband, Samuel, buried beneath the cedar tree beyond the creek. She thought of the many winters they had opened their door to drifters, riders, peddlers, and men who had lost their way. Samuel used to say a closed door in a storm was not caution. It was a judgment. Abigail stepped back. "Come in before the cold finishes what it started." The stranger moved slowly, as if every step had to be argued with. Once inside, he nearly fell against the wall. Abigail shut the door hard and dropped the latch. The sudden quiet of the house wrapped around them, broken only by the fire and the man's shaking breath. "Sit," she told him. He obeyed because he had no strength left to refuse. She pulled the chair nearest the stove and helped him lower himself into it. Snow melted from his sleeves and ran in little streams onto the floor. His fingers would not work right when he tried to unbutton his coat, so she did it for him without asking. His hands trembled so badly that she paused and glanced at his face. He looked away. "Cold got ahead of me," he muttered. Cold does that when a man thinks he can outride it. A faint breath left him. It might have been a laugh if he had been less frozen. Abigail hung his coat near the stove, then wrapped one of Samuel's old wool blankets around his shoulders. For half a second, her hand rested on the faded edge of it. That blanket had once smelled of tobacco and saddle leather. Now it smelled only of cedar chest and years gone by. She turned quickly to the stove. A pot of bean stew sat warming, thick with onions, potatoes, and the last of the smoked venison. She filled a bowl and set it before him, then added bread, butter, and a tin cup of coffee. The man stared at the food. "Eat," she said. He picked up the spoon, but his hand shook too hard. The spoon struck the bowl with a small, helpless sound. Abigail did not make him feel the shame of it. She simply sat across from him, took the spoon, filled it, and held it out. His jaw tightened. "I can manage." "Maybe tomorrow," she said. "Tonight you'll eat before you fall out of that chair." For a moment pride fought hunger. Hunger won. He leaned forward and took the first bite. Then another. Then another. The warmth came back to him slowly. Color rose beneath the gray of his cheeks. His breathing steadied. He kept his eyes low, but Abigail could see his hands curling tighter around the bowl, as if he feared someone might take it away. When he finished, she gave him more. Only after the second bowl did he speak again. "My name is Caleb Rusk." Abigail folded her hands on the table. "Abigail Mercer. I was headed west of Pine Hollow, took work at the Barrow Ranch." He swallowed and his eyes shifted toward the window. "Storm turned faster than I figured. My horse went down near the creek bend. She's alive, but she couldn't carry me. I tied her where the trees cut the wind." Abigail leaned forward. "How far?" 3 miles, maybe 4. Hard to tell in that white. "What's her name?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. His tired face changed, softened in a place he had not meant to show. "Rose." Abigail nodded once. "At first light we'll bring Rose in." He looked at her then, really looked. "You don't know me." "No," she said, "but I know what it is to lose something faithful in the cold." The fire cracked between them. Outside, the storm beat against the walls, hungry and blind. Inside, the stranger sat wrapped in a dead man's blanket, holding a widow's bowl in both hands. And Abigail Mercer, who had spent 5 years teaching her heart not to wait for anything, felt the first quiet warning that this night would not end when the snow stopped falling. Before dawn, the storm finally loosened its grip. The wind did not stop all at once. It fell away little by little, like a tired animal circling before sleep. The walls quit groaning. The windows stopped rattling. By the time Abigail opened her eyes, the house was wrapped in the heavy quiet that comes after a hard snow. For a moment, she forgot the stranger. Then she smelled coffee. Abigail sat up in bed, still as stone. No one had made coffee in her kitchen before sunrise, since Samuel was alive. She reached for her shawl and stepped into the cold hall. The floorboards gave their small morning complaints beneath her feet. A gray light rested at the windows, soft and dull, showing the kitchen in pieces. The stove had been fed. The coffee pot sat near the heat. The fire was alive with fresh wood. Caleb Rusk stood near the table, one hand braced on the back of a chair. He had found his strength enough to stand, though not enough to hide the stiffness in his body. Samuel's blanket was still wrapped around his shoulders. His dark hair had dried in uneven waves, and the cut near his temple looked cleaner now, but angry. He turned when he heard her. "I hope I didn't overstep," he said. "I woke early, fire was low." Abigail looked at the stove, then at the coffee. "You made it strong." "I figured winter does not respect weak coffee." That almost made her smile. She took 2 cups from the shelf and set them on the table. Caleb reached for the pot, but she gave him a look that stopped him. "You sit. You near froze in my doorway last night. No need to start acting useful before sunrise." "I'm used to earning my place." "That may be, but in this house, a man earns it better by not falling over before breakfast." He sat because the truth of it was plain. Abigail poured the coffee. They drank in a silence that was not comfortable yet, but not unfriendly either. Outside, the yard had changed. The fence posts wore tall white caps. The path to the barn was gone. The whole valley looked buried and innocent, as if the storm had not tried to kill anything in it. Caleb held the cup in both hands and stared through the window. "You think my mare made it?" Abigail heard the fear beneath the plain words. She respected him more for not hiding it with foolish pride. If she had trees around her and sense in her head, she had a fair chance. "She's got more sense than I do." "Most horses do." This time he did smile, though it was small and quickly gone. They ate fried corn cakes and the last of the stew. Caleb tried to stand too fast afterward and caught the table with one hand. Abigail saw the pain cross his face. "That side bothering you?" Bruised, I think. I came down hard when Rose slipped. Bruised can still make a fool of a man. I've been called worse. I believe that. She dressed for the cold while he pulled on his coat, now dry but stiff from the night before. It was not enough for the weather, so Abigail brought out Samuel's sheepskin-lined coat from the peg beside the pantry door. Caleb looked at it but did not take it. No, ma'am. Yes. That belonged to your husband. It did, and he is beyond needing sleeves. Caleb's mouth tightened, not in insult but in respect. He took the coat carefully like it was something fragile, though it was only old hide and wool. When he put it on, Abigail had to look away for a breath. The shape was wrong. The shoulders were different. The man inside it was not Samuel. Still, grief had a strange way of waking at the sight of familiar cloth. She reached for her gloves. They stepped outside into a world so bright it hurt. Snow came past Abigail's knees in places. Every step made a deep, dry crunch. The barn door had drifted halfway shut, and the horses inside nickered when they heard her voice. She chose Atlas, the big roan gelding with strong legs and a calm mind. Caleb moved to help saddle him, but Abigail pointed to a post. You stand there and make yourself decorative. I don't know how to do that. Then learn something new. He leaned against the post, watching her with a look she could feel even when her back was turned. Not a man judging a woman's work. Not a man surprised she knew how to do it. More like he was taking account of her, piece by piece, and finding nothing small. They rode together on Atlas, Abigail in front, Caleb behind her because the snow was too deep to lead another horse out. He kept one hand on the saddle and the other careful at his side, never touching her more than the ride required. She noticed that. A woman alone noticed such things. The creek bend lay east of the ranch, past a low rise and down through a stand of leafless willows. The whole way, Caleb watched the ground like a man trying to read a book the storm had torn apart. There, he said at last. Abigail saw the trees before she saw the mare. A dark shape stood beneath them, head low, reins tied to a branch. Snow had gathered along Rose's back, but when Caleb called her name, the mare lifted her head and gave a weak sound that carried across the cold. Caleb was off Atlas before Abigail could stop him. He stumbled once in the snow, then pushed forward, breath sharp with pain. Rose tossed her head and stepped toward him as far as the reins allowed. He reached her and pressed his forehead to her neck. Abigail stayed where she was for a moment. There was something private in the sight. A man and his horse, both worn thin by the night, both still standing. Caleb's gloved hand moved over the mare's face with a tenderness he had not yet spent on words. His shoulders shook once, not from cold this time. Abigail gave him the grace of looking away. She checked Rose's leg after he untied her. The mare had strained it but not broken anything. There was swelling near the lower joint and tenderness in the hoof, likely from a stone hidden under snow. Abigail ran her hand down the leg, slow and firm. She'll need rest, Abigail said. No hard riding for several days. Caleb exhaled like he had been holding that breath since midnight. Thank God. Thank the trees first. They did good work. He nodded and looked around the little stand, as if seeing it properly for the first time. Then his gaze dropped to something half buried near Rose's tracks. A leather pouch lay in the snow. Caleb moved quickly and picked it up, too quickly for a man with bruised ribs. Abigail saw his face change as he brushed ice from the flap. That yours? She asked. Yes. But he said it a little too fast. The pouch was small, tied tight with dark cord. Not money, Abigail thought. Not tobacco. Something about the way his thumb held the edge told her it mattered more than both. He tucked it inside Samuel's coat. A warning stirred in her, quiet but real. Kindness had opened her door, but kindness was not blindness. Caleb Rusk had nearly died in the storm, and his worry for his mare seemed honest enough. Still, Every man carried a past, and some pasts came looking. They started back through the snow with Rose limping beside Atlas. The sun broke over the ridge, spilling thin gold across the white valley. Behind them, near the creek bend, fresh tracks marked the snow beyond the trees. Not theirs. Not Rose's. Someone else had passed there in the night. Abigail did not speak of the tracks right away. She saw Caleb notice them too. His eyes moved across the snow, stopped for a breath, then came back to Rose as if he had trained himself not to stare at danger too long. That told Abigail more than any confession would have. The tracks were narrow and deep, made by a single horse moving slow along the creek line. Whoever had passed there had not come to help. They had kept to the trees, away from the open ground, away from any window that might catch sight of them. Abigail led Atlas home while Caleb walked beside Rose. The mare limped but stayed calm, her head low, her breath steaming in the morning air. Caleb kept one hand near her neck, gentle as a prayer. Every now and then his fingers touched the inside of Samuel's coat where he had hidden the leather pouch. When they reached the ranch yard, Abigail opened the barn wide and brought Rose inside. The other horses shifted in their stalls, ears forward, curious about the newcomer. Dust rose from the hay as Abigail laid down fresh bedding. Caleb rubbed Rose dry with an old sack, moving slowly because his side pained him, but refusing to stop until the mare was warm and settled. "She owes you her life," he said quietly. "A horse does not owe a body for being found," Abigail said. "You just keep her alive after." Caleb looked down at Rose's leg. "I will." There was something in the way he said it that made Abigail turn her head. It sounded like more than a promise to a horse. Back inside, she set water to heat and told him to sit near the stove. He obeyed this time without argument, which worried her more than if he had fought her. His face had gone pale from the walk back. The cut at his temple had opened again and left a thin red line near his brow. She brought a clean cloth and stood before him. "Hold still. I can clean it. You can barely sit straight." He gave a tired sigh and let his hands rest on his knees. Abigail dabbed at the cut. Up close, he looked younger than he had in the doorway, maybe 35, maybe less, though hard living had set shadows around his eyes. There was a small scar near his jaw and another across the knuckles of his right hand. Not marks of a cruel man, she thought. Marks of a man who had been caught in rough places. "Those tracks by the creek," she said. His jaw tightened. "I saw them. Were they following you?" For a long moment he said nothing. The fire popped softly behind her. Outside, snow slid from the roof and landed with a dull thump beside the porch. "At first I hope not," Caleb said. "That is not an answer." "No, ma'am, it is not." She lowered the cloth. "Caleb Rusk, I opened my door to you. That does not mean I opened my house to every trouble riding behind you." His eyes lifted to hers, and she saw shame there again. Not guilt exactly. Shame. The kind that sits on a good man when the world has made him look like a bad one. "I did not steal from anyone," he said. "I did not ask that." His hand went to the coat. He looked toward the window, then back at her. His voice dropped. "There is a letter inside, and a small silver cross." Abigail waited. They belonged to a woman named Mary Bell. She worked as a cook at a cattle camp south of Casper. She died last month from fever. Before she passed, she asked me to carry them to her daughter. The cloth in Abigail's hand grew still. "Where is the daughter?" "Pine Hollow." "That is where you said you were headed." "Yes." "Then who is following you?" Caleb swallowed. "A man who wants the letter burned." Abigail felt the room seemed to grow colder, though the fire had not changed. "What is in it?" "I don't know all of it. Mary told me enough to know it names the man who left her and her child years ago. He is not poor now. He has land. a fine house, a clean name in town. Mary said he would deny the girl unless the truth was put in his own hand. Abigail stared at him, trying to measure the story. It had the plainness of truth, but plain truth could still bring dangerous men. You read the letter? No, it was sealed when she gave it to me, still sealed now. Then how does the man know? Because Mary's brother was there when she gave it to me. He drinks, he talks, and some people pay for talk. Abigail sat across from him slowly. A widow alone in winter had to think carefully. Mercy was not always simple. A warm bowl of stew could become a doorway to trouble. A stranger's sorrow could be real and still carry a shadow long enough to reach her home. Caleb seemed to read the thought on her face. I will leave as soon as Rose can walk. She cannot walk today. I know. And maybe not tomorrow. I know that too. His hands curled into fists, then opened again. He looked down at Samuel's coat as if he had no right to be inside it. I should not have come to your door. Abigail's answer came sharper than she expected. Do not make my choice smaller than it was. He looked up. I opened that door because a man was freezing on my porch, she said. If trouble comes after, that does not turn kindness into foolishness. It only means kindness has a price sometimes. The words hung between them. For the first time since he arrived, Caleb's face changed fully. The guarded look broke, and beneath it was a grief so worn and quiet that Abigail had to look away. She had seen men cry loudly at graves and men laugh to keep from crying in saloons. Caleb did neither. His eyes simply filled, and he bowed his head like a man who had been handed mercy when he expected judgment. If this moment touches your heart, stay with the story, because some doors do not just let a stranger in. They let the truth come in behind him. That afternoon, Abigail found him asleep in the chair, one hand still resting over the hidden pouch. She covered him with the blanket again and stood there a moment, listening to the wind comb snow across the yard. Then a horse snorted outside. Abigail turned toward the window. At the far edge of the white field near the cedar fence, a rider sat watching the house. The rider did not come closer. He sat beyond the fence line where the snow lay smooth and bright under the pale afternoon sun. His horse was dark, almost black against the white field. The man wore a low hat and a long brown coat, and even from the window, Abigail could feel the weight of his watching. She did not call out. She did not wake Caleb. She stood beside the curtain with one hand on the window frame, her breath slow, her eyes narrowed. The rider stayed still for a long while, then turned his horse toward the creek trees and vanished behind the ridge. Only then did Caleb stir. He opened his eyes as if some part of him had felt the danger leave. His hand went first to the pouch under Samuel's coat. Then he looked at Abigail and saw her face. What is it? A rider was watching the house. Caleb stood too fast. Pain caught him and he gripped the chair, but his eyes had gone sharp. Which way did he go? Toward the creek. He crossed to the window and looked out, though there was nothing left to see except snow and the long shadows of fence posts. Did you know him? Abigail asked. No. But you know what he is. Caleb's mouth tightened. A warning. Abigail turned from the window. A warning for you or for me? He did not answer quickly enough. That silence angered her more than a lie would have. I am not a girl hiding behind a flour barrel, Caleb. If a man has followed you to my land, I will not stand here being protected from the truth like it is too heavy for my hands. Caleb looked at her then. The hard edge left his face. You're right. I know. He almost smiled, but it died before it became anything. The man who wants that letter buried is named Silas Whitcomb, Caleb said. He owns a feed store in Pine Hollow now. Folks there call him respectable. He lends money, gives to the church. Sits at the front when the preacher talks about honesty. Abigail felt disgust rise in her, slow and bitter. And Mary Bell. She was his wife once. Abigail went still. Caleb nodded. Not in a church with flowers and witnesses, but enough. There was a preacher, a paper, and a promise. When Silas saw a richer chance, he left her in a mining camp with a baby girl and no name anyone would honor. Mary kept quiet for years. Pride, maybe. Fear, too. But when fever took hold, she said she was done letting her daughter live under his cowardice. What is the daughter's name? Lily. The name softened the room for a moment. Abigail thought of a child growing into a young woman with half her story hidden from her. She thought of Thomas as a boy, running across this very kitchen with mud on his boots and Samuel's laugh behind him. A child deserved truth, even when truth arrived late and carrying pain. How old is she? 17. Abigail looked toward the window again. The snow outside shone with a beauty that did not care what men did to one another. Does Lily know you are coming? No, Mary said she works at Mrs. Vale's boarding house in Pine Hollow. Said if I found her, I was to give her the cross first, then the letter. Why the cross? Caleb reached inside the coat and took out the leather pouch. His fingers hesitated over the cord. Then he opened it and placed a small silver cross on the table. It was plain and worn thin around the edges, not worth much in money, worth plenty in years. Mary wore it when Lily was born, he said. She wanted her to have something that had touched her mother's heart. Abigail sat slowly. Her anger faded into something heavier. The cross caught the firelight and gave it back in a small, trembling shine. She trusted you, Abigail said. Caleb looked at the little cross. She trusted the only man in the room who was sober enough to listen. That still counts. His eyes lifted to hers. Maybe. No maybe about it. A gust pushed snow from the porch roof, and both of them turned at the sound. Caleb closed the pouch again, but Abigail saw how carefully he handled it. That evening, she moved through her chores with quiet purpose. She fed the animals, checked Rose's leg, and barred the barn door from the inside before returning to the house. Caleb wanted to help, but she gave him a look that made him stay by the stove. Outside, dusk gathered early. The world became blue, then gray, then black. The storm had passed, but the cold remained fierce enough to make the logs in the walls crack softly. Abigail cooked supper, with the rifle leaning near the pantry door. Caleb noticed. You know how to use it. My husband taught me before Thomas was born. I hope you never need to. So do I, but hope is not a lock. They ate at the table with the lamp low. Caleb did not eat much. He listened too often, his head turning toward each small sound outside. Abigail watched him over her cup. You have carried trouble before, she said. He looked tired suddenly. I've carried other men's trouble most of my life. That is not what I said. He leaned back and the chair gave a small creak. I was a deputy once, down in Kansas, not for long. Abigail waited. There was a boy accused of stealing a horse. He said he did not do it. I believed him, but the town wanted someone to blame. I was young enough to think truth won if a man just spoke it clear. Caleb's jaw worked once. Truth did not win that day. The fire snapped. What happened to the boy? He ran, they shot at him. He lived, but barely. I left the badge after that. Abigail heard the old wound in his voice. Not the kind a doctor could clean. The kind that stayed under the ribs and ached whenever a man saw injustice wearing clean clothes. So now you carry letters for dying women, she said. I suppose I do. No, Abigail said softly. You carry the truth because once you saw what happened when no one did. Caleb looked away, but not before she saw that her words had struck deep. Later, after the dishes were washed and the fire burned low, Abigail went to Samuel's old room to bring Caleb an extra quilt. She paused at the doorway. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, the pouch open beside him, holding the silver cross in his palm. His head was bowed. "I did not mean to disturb you," she said. He closed his hand gently. "You didn't." She placed the quilt at the foot of the bed. For a moment the room seemed full of ghosts. Samuel's old trunk, Samuel's coat on Caleb's shoulders, a stranger carrying a dead woman's last hope. Abigail felt the past and present standing too close together, like two riders on a narrow trail. Then a sound cut through the house. A slow scrape at the back door. Caleb rose at once. Abigail lifted the lamp. The scrape came again, followed by a folded paper sliding under the door and stopping on the kitchen floor like a pale tongue. Caleb picked it up. On it, written in hard black letters, were 6 words. "Give me the letter by morning." Abigail read the note twice, though there was no need. "Give me the letter by morning." The words were plain. That made them worse. No threat written beneath. No name signed at the bottom. No dramatic promise of harm. Just a demand from a man sure the world would step aside for him if he pressed hard enough. Caleb stood near the back door with the paper in his hand, his face pale in the lamplight. "He came close," Abigail said. "Yes. Close enough to hear us if we had spoken too loud." Caleb looked toward the dark window. "Maybe." Abigail took the note from him and held it over the stove. The flame caught the corner, curled the paper black, and ate the message until it was ash. Caleb watched her. "You should not have to be part of this." "There it is again." "What?" "You're trying to hand me my own fear like it belongs only to you." He looked down. Abigail turned from the stove. "That man crossed my yard. He came to my back door. He pushed a thread under my roof. I became part of it when his boots touched my snow." Caleb's eyes lifted, and something like respect settled deeper in them. "Then we should decide before morning. We already know what he wants. He wants the letter. And we know what Mary wanted." The room went quiet at the mention of the dead woman's name. Caleb reached inside Samuel's coat and took out the leather pouch. He placed it on the table between them. For the first time, Abigail saw his hands hesitate not from cold or pain, but from the weight of choice. "I can ride before dawn," he said. "Rose can't carry me, but I can take one of your horses and head south before he expects it." Abigail gave him a flat look. "In this snow with bruised ribs, while a man watches the creek line. I have done harder things." "Harder is not the same as wiser." His mouth closed. She moved to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see the yard. The moon had risen behind clouds, turning the snow faint silver. The barn sat still. The fence posts stood like dark pins in white cloth. Nothing moved. That made her uneasy. A man who wanted a letter badly enough to creep to a widow's back door would not vanish because the night was cold. "He expects us to be afraid," Abigail said. "He is right to expect it." "No, he expects fear to make us foolish. That is different." Caleb stood behind her, not too close. "What do you suggest?" "At dawn we go to Pine Hollow." His head turned sharply. "We?" "Yes." "No." Abigail let the curtain fall and faced him. "Do not mistake concern for authority. You would be safer here." "Would I?" He had no good answer. "The writer knows this house now," she said. "He knows I saw him. He knows you are hurt. If you leave alone and he doubles back, what then?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "I will not use you as a shield. And I will not let you use my age, my widowhood, or my good table manners as an excuse to leave me blind." The words struck him silent. Abigail softened, but only a little. "I am going because Pine Hollow knows me. Mrs. Vale owes me for 2 summers of butter and eggs. The sheriff there knew Samuel. If we ride in together, clean and steady, with truth in hand, Silas Whitcomb has less room to make you look like the trouble." Caleb looked at the pouch. He may still try. Men like that always try. The fire burned low. Caleb moved to add wood, but Abigail reached it first. She placed 2 split logs on the coals and watched sparks climb the chimney. "When Samuel died," she said, "people thought the ranch would break me. Some were kind. Some were curious. A few came around pretending to help while their eyes counted my cattle and measured my fence line." Caleb listened without moving. "One man offered to buy the place for half its worth, said it was mercy, said a woman alone should not hold land she could not protect." Abigail's face stayed calm, but the memory sharpened her voice. "I told him I had buried one man I loved and had no interest in burying my temper beside him." Caleb's mouth twitched. "He did not come back," she said. "I can believe that. I learned then that some men confuse gentleness with weakness because it comforts them to do so. Silas Whitcomb may have clean boots and a church pew, but he has made that same mistake." Caleb stood very still, and the guarded look in his eyes eased for the first time that night. "If Mary had met you," he said quietly, "she would have trusted you too." Abigail did not answer at once. She looked at the little leather pouch. A dying woman's last wish, a daughter's hidden name, a man's cowardice wrapped in respectability. It was a small thing on the table, but Abigail could feel how many lives leaned toward it. If you believe one act of courage can change what a whole town thinks it knows, stay with this story. The truth has not reached Pine Hollow yet, and when it does, not every heart will be ready for it. They slept little. Caleb took the chair near the kitchen window with the rifle across his knees. Abigail did not argue after he promised not to step outside without waking her. She lay in her room fully dressed beneath the quilt, staring into the dark, listening to the house breathe. Once near midnight, she heard the boards creak and opened her door. Caleb stood at the mantel, looking at the old photograph of Samuel. The rifle rested safely against the wall. "He looks kind," Caleb said softly. "He was. I am sorry to wear his coat." Abigail stepped into the kitchen. "Samuel would have handed it to you himself." Caleb swallowed and nodded. "I have not known many homes where that would be true." The sadness in that sentence sat between them, quiet and old. Before Abigail could answer, Rose whinnied sharply from the barn. Caleb grabbed the rifle. Abigail lifted the lantern, and together they moved to the front window. Outside, a shape crossed the yard near the barn door, bent low against the wind. Then another shape appeared beyond the fence. Not one rider this time. 2. And one of them was leading Abigail's big roan, gelding out into the snow. Abigail did not scream. Fear rose in her fast, but it met something harder before it reached her throat. She set the lantern on the table, took the rifle from Caleb's hands, and moved to the door with a calm that made even him pause. "Abigail," he said under his breath, "they are stealing my horse." "I see that." "Then stop whispering like the house is asleep." She lifted the latch and stepped onto the porch before he could argue. Cold rushed in behind her. The yard lay silver under the clouded moon, and the 2 men by the barn turned at the sound of the door opening. One held Atlas by the bridle. The big roan tossed his head, uneasy but not wild. The other man stood near the barn door with something long in his hand, maybe a riding crop, maybe a stick. His hat brim hid most of his face. Abigail raised the rifle, not at their hearts, but high enough that they understood she knew what it was for. "That horse belongs in my barn," she called. The man holding Atlas froze. The second man took one slow step forward. "Go inside, Mrs. Mercer." Her blood chilled, not from the weather. He knew her name. Caleb came out behind her, still wearing Samuel's coat, his face tight with pain and anger. "Leave the horse." The man near the barn laughed softly. "You are in no place to give orders, Rusk." So there it was, no more guessing. The shadow had a voice now. Abigail kept the rifle steady. "And you are in no place to steal from a widow's barn." "We are borrowing," the man said. "Thieves often prefer prettier words." The man holding Atlas shifted. He was younger than the speaker, nervous in the shoulders. Abigail saw that and fixed her gaze on him. "Let go of the bridle, son." He looked toward the older man. "Hold that horse," the older man snapped. Caleb moved one step down from the porch. "Silas sent you." The older man smiled then, and moonlight caught a narrow face with pale eyes. "Mr. Whitcomb does not need to send anyone. Some of us just care about keeping peace in Pine Hollow. Peace built on a lie will not stand long." Big words from a drifter carrying what is not his. Abigail's hands tightened around the rifle. She felt Caleb's anger before she saw it. His body leaned forward, ready to move, though pain had him standing crooked. She spoke before he could. "The next man who pulls my horse one more step from that barn will answer to Sheriff Maddox by breakfast." The older man's smile faded a little. "Sheriff Maddox sleeps in town, ma'am. This valley is a long ride from help." "Yes," Abigail said, "and sound carries clean on snow." She lifted the rifle and fired once into the empty sky. The shot cracked across the valley like a board breaking in heaven. Atlas reared, jerking the bridle from the younger man's hand. Rose cried from inside the barn. The younger man stumbled backward and nearly fell into a snowdrift. Caleb took 2 hard steps toward Atlas, caught the loose bridle, and pulled the roan back toward the porch. The older man swore, but he did not reach for anything. Not with Abigail standing there, smoke curling from the rifle barrel and her eyes fixed on him like winter judgment. Lights flickered far down the valley. One, then another. "Neighbors." The older man saw them too. "This is not done," he said. "No," Abigail answered, "but this part is." He backed away toward his horse beyond the fence. The younger man followed fast, shame plain even in the dark. They mounted and rode toward the creek trees, leaving churned snow behind them. Caleb stood with one hand on Atlas's neck, breathing hard. Abigail lowered the rifle, only when the riders were gone. For a moment neither of them moved. The cold wrapped around them. The smell of gun smoke drifted thin and bitter in the air. Then Caleb turned to her. "You scared the life out of me." She looked at him. "Good, it proves you still have one." He let out a breath, half pain and half relief. They brought Atlas back into the barn. Abigail checked the latch, then checked Rose and the other horses. Rose was frightened but safe. Atlas pushed his nose against Abigail's shoulder as if apologizing for nearly being taken. "It was not your fault," she whispered, rubbing his face. Caleb stood near the stall door, his expression dark. "They were trying to keep us from leaving," he said. "Yes. If they had taken Atlas, we would be trapped until Rose healed." "Not trapped," Abigail said, "delayed." "Delayed may be enough for Silas. He could reach Lily first, turn her against the letter, make her afraid to read it." Abigail looked at Rose's swollen leg. "Then we do not wait for Rose." Caleb frowned. "Atlas can carry one rider well in this snow, not 2 for that distance." "Then we take the wagon." He stared at her. "The wagon road is half buried." "Not the old freight cut behind Miller's Ridge. It runs higher. Wind strips it cleaner." "You know that road." "I hauled feed over it when Samuel broke his ankle in '72. A faint, unwilling smile touched Caleb's mouth. "Of course you did." They returned to the house, but sleep was gone for good now. Abigail packed before dawn with the careful hands of a woman who had spent her life making hard trips possible. She wrapped bread, dried apples, coffee, a little bacon, and 2 quilts. She placed Mary Bell's pouch inside a small flour tin, then tucked the tin under a folded feed sack in the wagon box. Caleb watched her hide it. That is clever. That is ordinary. Men looking for secrets rarely search under chores. By first light, the eastern sky had turned pale blue. 2 neighbors rode into the yard, Mr. Harlan and his eldest boy, both wrapped in heavy coats. They had heard the shot and come as soon as the dark lifted. Abigail told them enough, not all: a theft, a threat, a ride to Pine Hollow. Mr. Harlan offered to come along. Abigail thanked him but shook her head. Watch the place instead. If those men come back, let them find eyes waiting. The old neighbor nodded. Samuel would be proud of you. Abigail's face softened, but she did not answer. Soon the wagon creaked out of the yard, Atlas pulling strong between the shafts. Caleb sat beside Abigail, one hand pressed to his ribs, the other resting near the hidden flour tin. The ranch house grew smaller behind them. Smoke rose from its chimney into the cold morning. For the first time in years, Abigail left it not for supplies, not for church, not for a neighbor's need, but for a truth that did not belong to her and somehow had become hers to protect. By noon, the old freight cut opened before them. And there, nailed to a pine at the narrowest bend, hung Mary Bell's silver cross. For a moment, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. The silver cross moved in the wind, turning slowly on the nail driven through the pine bark. It flashed once in the pale sun, then turned dull again. A short strip of blue ribbon hung from it, the same color Caleb had described tied around Mary Bell's wrist when fever took the last strength from her hand. Abigail pulled Atlas to a stop. The wagon creaked once and settled. Caleb did not move. His face had gone gray, and for the first time since she had known him, Abigail saw fear rise clean and open in his eyes. "That is hers," he whispered. Abigail's hand went to the wagon box. She pulled back the folded feed sack, lifted the flour tin, and opened it. The leather pouch was still there. Her fingers worked the cord loose. Inside lay the sealed letter. But the cross was gone. Caleb stared at the empty space beside the letter, as if it had opened under his feet. "How?" Abigail asked. His answer came low: "Last night." The back door, the note, the scrape across the floor, a man's hand slipping through darkness while all eyes were on the paper. Abigail felt anger burn hot in her chest, not because they had lost the cross alone, but because someone had touched a dying woman's last gift and used it like bait. Caleb climbed down from the wagon, slow and stiff. Abigail reached for his sleeve, but he shook his head once and stepped toward the tree. He took hold of the cross carefully. His thumb moved over the worn edge. "There's a mark," he said. "Here, Mary showed me. Lily bit it when she was a baby, left a little bend in the lower arm." Abigail came beside him and saw it. A small, crooked dent, almost nothing. The nail had been driven through the top ring, not the cross itself. That mercy felt crueler somehow. Whoever had done it wanted the message clear, but the keepsake whole. Caleb pulled the nail free and closed the cross in his fist. Then they heard a horse shift above them. Abigail looked up. On the ridge to their left, half hidden by pine branches, the narrow-faced man from the barn sat on his dark horse. Beside him was the younger man who had tried to take Atlas. 2 more riders waited behind them. The narrow-faced man touched the brim of his hat. "Road gets difficult from here, Mrs. Mercer." Abigail did not step back. "It got difficult when you came onto my land." He smiled. "You have spirit, I'll grant you that." Caleb moved closer to the wagon, but the man raised one gloved hand. "No need for foolishness, Rusk. We do not want the woman hurt." "Hurt?" Abigail said, her voice sharp as frost. "You nail a dead mother's cross to a tree and speak to me about hurt." The younger rider looked down at his reins. Shame again. Abigail marked it. The older man's smile thinned. We want the letter. Give it over and you can turn this wagon around. No one need know how close you came to making a mistake. Caleb's hand hovered near the wagon seat where the rifle lay wrapped in a quilt. Abigail saw it and spoke before he moved. No. The man's eyes shifted to her. You should think carefully. I have, that is why I said no. This is not your affair. A woman gave her last words into another person's keeping. A child has a right to know her name. That makes it any decent person's affair. For a heartbeat, the man's face showed annoyance. Not rage, not guilt. Annoyance like truth was an insect buzzing near his ear. You talk fine, he said, but fine talk does not move a wagon through 4 riders. Abigail looked at the narrow bend ahead. Snow lay thin there, swept by wind from the ridge. Pines crowded both sides. Behind them, the old freight road curved back toward the open valley. They could not outrun mounted men. They could not fight them without risking more than the letter. And if she let fear make the choice, Silas Whitcomb would win before Pine Hollow ever saw their faces. She turned slightly toward Caleb. Get in the wagon. He stared at her. Abigail. Get in. Something in her tone made him obey, though every line of him fought it. Abigail climbed up beside him, took the reins, and lifted her eyes to the riders. I am going forward, she said. The older man laughed once. Then you will be stopped. No, Abigail said, I will be witnessed. Before he could answer, she raised her voice and called toward the trees ahead. Mrs. Vale, if you are there, this is the moment. Silence followed. Caleb turned to her in shock. Then from behind the bend came the sound of a wagon wheel creaking. A small gray mule stepped into view, pulling a narrow cart. On the seat sat a round-faced woman in a heavy black coat, with a shotgun resting across her lap and her chin lifted like a church bell. Beside her rode Sheriff Maddox, his badge dull against his winter coat. The riders on the ridge stiffened. Abigail let out the breath she had been holding since she saw the cross. Mrs. Vale guided the mule closer. You are late, Abby. Road was watched, Abigail said. I figured as much. Caleb looked between them. You knew. Abigail kept her eyes on the ridge. I sent Mr. Harlan's boy before we left. Told him to ride the Lower Creek Trail and fetch Mrs. Vale and the sheriff to meet us here. The narrow-faced man cursed softly. Sheriff Maddox looked up at him. Elias Crow, you and those men come down slow, hands where I can see them. Elias did not move. Mrs. Vale raised her shotgun a little, not in wild threat, but in firm warning. Do not make me explain to Pine Hollow why grown men are hiding in trees from a widow and a sick rider. The younger man broke first. He guided his horse down the slope with both hands lifted. The others followed, one by one. Elias came last, his face hard with hate he could not spend. When his horse reached the road, Abigail saw Caleb's hand close tighter around Mary's cross. Sheriff Maddox looked at him. You have the letter. Caleb nodded. Then we ride into town together. The road opened beyond the bend, pale and shining toward Pine Hollow. But as the wagons began moving again, Mrs. Vale rode close to Abigail and lowered her voice. Silas already knows Lily has been asking questions. Abigail's heart tightened. Ahead, church bells began to ring in Pine Hollow, though it was not Sunday. Pine Hollow did not look like a town waiting for trouble. It looked clean and bright beneath the winter sun, with snow resting on the rooftops and smoke rising from chimneys in soft gray ribbons. The church stood at the far end of Main Street, its white steeple sharp against the blue sky. The feed store sat across from the boarding house, with fresh paint on its sign and 2 barrels of oats displayed neatly by the door. Silas Whitcomb's name was painted above the window in bold black letters. Abigail looked at it as the wagon rolled into town. A man could hide a great deal behind clean glass. The bells kept ringing, not fast like fire, slow and steady, calling people out of kitchens, shops, and back rooms. Curtains moved, doors opened. Faces appeared along the boardwalks, curious at first, then uneasy when they saw Sheriff Maddox riding beside Mrs. Vale and Elias Crow with the other men behind them under watch. Caleb sat straight beside Abigail, though pain had taken most of the color from his face. One hand rested inside Samuel's coat, holding the leather pouch and the silver cross. He had not let go of either since the ridge. Mrs. Vale guided her mule cart toward the boarding house. She was a stout woman with silver hair pinned tight, but there was nothing soft in her expression now. "She is inside," Mrs. Vale said. "I told her to stay in the back room." "Does she know?" Abigail asked. "She knows enough to be frightened, not enough to understand why." Caleb's jaw tightened. Mary wanted the cross given first. "Then that is what we will do," Abigail said. Before they could step down, the door of the feed store opened. Silas Whitcomb came out buttoning his dark coat. He was not what Abigail had expected. She had pictured a hard-looking man, the kind whose cruelty showed in his jaw or eyes. But Silas was handsome in a careful way, with trimmed gray hair, polished boots, and a face made for public trust. He looked like a man who shook hands after church and remembered widows at Christmas. That made Abigail dislike him more. He paused on the boardwalk, looking first at the sheriff, then at Elias Crow, then at Caleb. Only for one brief second did his expression crack. Then he smiled. "Sheriff Maddox," he called, "what is all this?" The sheriff swung down from his horse. "You may want to come with us, Silas." "To where?" "The boarding house." Silas gave a soft laugh and looked around at the watching townspeople. "Has Mrs. Vale burned another pie and blamed me for the smoke?" No one laughed much. Mrs. Vale's eyes narrowed. "You always did reach for charm when honesty was too far away." The smile on Silas's face cooled. "Careful, Margaret." "No," Abigail said, stepping down from the wagon. "That word belongs to you now." Silas turned his attention to her. His eyes moved over her plain coat, her worn gloves, the snow crusted on her hem. Abigail saw the quick judgment there. Widow, ranch woman, tired hands, no threat. She let him make the mistake. "And you are?" he asked. "Abigail Mercer." "Ah, the woman who took in the drifter. The woman whose horse your men tried to steal." A murmur ran through the street. Silas's smile vanished for half a breath. "My men." Elias Crow looked down. Sheriff Maddox stepped closer. "We will sort that out after we speak with Lily." The name changed the air. Silas looked toward the boarding house window. His face stayed calm, but his hand closed once at his side. "I do not see what business a girl from Mrs. Vale's kitchen has with me." Caleb climbed down from the wagon then. He moved slowly, one arm held close to his ribs, but he stood tall when his boots touched the snow. "She has business with the truth." Silas stared at him. "You should have kept riding, Mr. Rusk." "Mary Bell asked me not to." At Mary's name, a few older faces in the crowd shifted. Someone whispered. Someone else crossed herself. The boarding house door opened. A young woman stood in the doorway. She was slender, with brown hair braided over one shoulder and a white apron tied over a blue dress. Her face had the pale, pinched look of someone who had been told too little while fearing too much, but her eyes were steady. Abigail noticed that first. The girl was afraid, yes, but she had not run from the sound of her own name. Mrs. Vale moved toward her. "Lily, stay near me." Lily's eyes found Caleb. "Are you the man who knew my mother?" Caleb took off his hat. "Yes, miss." The whole street seemed quiet. Even the horses stood still. Caleb reached into the pouch and brought out the silver cross. He held it in his palm. not high like proof in a court, but low and gentle like something living. She told me to give you this first. Lily stared at it, her lips parted. She stepped down from the doorway and took it with both hands. For a moment she did not speak. Then her thumb found the little bend in the lower arm of the cross. Her face broke. "I remember this," she whispered. "She used to let me hold it when I was small." Mrs. Vale put one arm around her, but Lily did not look away from the cross. Caleb's voice grew rough. She said it had touched her heart. She wanted it to touch yours again. Tears slipped down Lily's cheeks, but she stood straighter. "And the letter?" she asked. Silas moved then, only one step but enough. "Lily," he said, his voice smooth and low, "you are upset. Grief makes people believe things that are not useful." Abigail turned toward him. "Truth does not need to be useful to be true." Lily looked at Silas. Something passed across her face, not surprise exactly, more like a missing piece finally sliding toward its place. "You knew my mother," Lily said. Silas sighed, performing sadness for the crowd. "Many of us knew Mary. She was troubled." Caleb's hand clenched. Abigail touched his sleeve, warning him not to give Silas the anger he wanted. Lily lifted her chin. "That is not what I asked." The crowd murmured again, softer this time. Caleb took out the sealed letter. The paper was creased from travel, but the seal held. He gave it to Lily. Her hands trembled as she broke it open. No one moved while she read. The first tear fell quickly. The second came slower. By the time she reached the bottom, her face had changed from grief to something sharper. Not hatred. Not yet. It was the terrible pain of a child seeing the cowardice of an adult clearly for the first time. She looked at Silas. "My mother wrote that you married her before God in Silver Creek," Lily said, her voice shaking but loud enough for the street. "She wrote that you left before I was born. She wrote that you knew my name." Silas's face hardened. A sick woman's words. Lily unfolded the last page. She sent the preacher's mark. Silence dropped like a stone. Sheriff Maddox stepped forward and took the page Lily offered. He read it once, then looked at Silas. "I know this preacher's seal," he said, "and I know the witness named here." Silas's fine public face finally cracked. If you believe a hidden truth can still find its way home after years of silence, remember this moment. Sometimes justice does not arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives in a young woman's trembling hands. Lily pressed the silver cross to her chest. Silas looked at the crowd, searching for the old respect, the old safety, the old lie. But one by one, the people of Pine Hollow looked away from him. Silas Whitcomb stood in the middle of Main Street with snow around his polished boots and watched his good name fall apart without a sound. That was the strange thing about it. No one shouted at first. No one rushed him. No one threw stones or called for blood. The town simply grew quiet around him, and in that quiet, every kind smile he had borrowed from honest people began to slip from his face. Lily held the silver cross against her heart with one hand and the letter in the other. Her tears had stopped, but the wet marks stayed on her cheeks. She looked younger and older all at once, like a girl who had just lost the last small hope that her father had only been absent by accident. Silas looked toward the sheriff. "You cannot take a fever letter as law." Sheriff Maddox folded the page carefully. "No, but I can take it as reason to ask questions, and I can take Elia's crow and those men attempting to stop its delivery as reason to ask harder ones." Elias shifted near his horse. "I was only told to slow them down." Silas turned on him. "Be quiet." That was all it took. The crowd heard the command in his voice, not the voice of an innocent man surprised by trouble. The voice of a man used to giving orders in the dark and expecting them to stay there. Mrs. Vale stepped in front of Lily, as if Silas might try to reach her with nothing but his eyes. Abigail saw Caleb's hands tighten at his sides. She moved closer, not touching him, only standing near enough to remind him that this was not Kansas, and today truth had witnesses. Silas drew himself up. Mary Bell was a troubled woman. Everyone who knew her knew that. She carried bitterness for years. If she wrote my name, it was because she wanted money from me, or revenge. Lily flinched at the word, but she did not lower her gaze. Abigail spoke then, her voice calm enough to carry. A dying mother does not send a cross to her daughter for revenge. Silas's eyes flashed toward her. You have known this matter for one day, Mrs. Mercer. Do not dress yourself as judge. No, Abigail said. I am only a woman who opened a door in a storm. But I know the difference between a man carrying a promise and a man trying to bury one. A few people murmured at that. Caleb lowered his head for a second. The words had landed somewhere deep in him. Sheriff Maddox took Elias by the arm and nodded to his deputy, who had come from the jail after hearing the bells. The other riders were led away first, quiet now, their courage gone in daylight. Elias looked back once at Silas, hoping to be saved by the man he had served. Silas did not look at him. That told Pine Hollow plenty. Lily stepped away from Mrs. Vale. Did you know about me? Silas's face hardened, but something in the girl's voice held him. She did not ask like a child begging to be loved. She asked like someone standing at a locked door with the key already in her hand. Did you know? She said again. For a moment Silas looked tired. It passed quickly, but Abigail saw it. So did Caleb, so did half the town. Yes, Silas said. The word struck Lily harder than any denial could have. Mrs. Vale whispered her name, but Lily lifted one hand to stop her. Silas looked away from the girl and toward the crowd, still fighting for the only thing he truly loved. I was young. Mary understood the situation. There was no proper future in that mining camp. I built something here. I became someone. Lily's voice shook. You became someone by leaving us as no one. The street went still again. Silas had no answer for that. Caleb looked at Lily with a grief Abigail understood. He had brought the truth, but truth was not soft. It did not tuck a person into bed and promise morning would hurt less. It opened the wound clean so it could finally heal. Sheriff Maddox stepped beside Silas. You will come with me now. For what charge? For paying men to threaten travelers, trespass on Mrs. Mercer's land, and attempt theft of her horse. We will discuss the rest after I speak to the circuit judge. Silas gave a bitter laugh. You think this town will turn on me over a dead woman and a kitchen girl? No one answered. Then Mr. Vale, a thin man who rarely spoke above a cough, stepped from the boarding house doorway. That kitchen girl fed my wife when she was sick last spring, he said. She sat up 3 nights with our boarders during fever. She has done more honest work in this town than some men with names on windows. One by one, others found their courage. The blacksmith said Mary Bell had once sent money to the church poor box, though she had little herself. The schoolteacher said Lily had learned sums by lamplight after working all day. The barber said Silas had asked too many questions that week about a rider from Casper. None of it was a court judgment, but it was something Silas had feared almost as much. It was memory waking up. The sheriff took Silas by the arm. This time, Silas did not resist. His face had gone empty and cold. As he passed Caleb, he leaned close enough for only him and Abigail to hear. You should have stayed lost in the snow. Caleb answered softly, I was found. Silas looked at Abigail then, and the hate in his eyes made the winter seem warmer by comparison. But he was led away before it could become more than a look. The crowd began to break apart, speaking in low voices. Mrs. Vale guided Lily inside the boarding house, but Lily stopped at the threshold and turned back. Mr. Rusk. Caleb removed his hat again. Yes, miss. My mother, was she alone at the end? The question cut through him. Abigail saw it in the way his shoulders dropped. No, he said, I was there. A woman named Clara from the camp was there too. Your mother was weak, but she was clear. She spoke your name last. Lily pressed the cross harder to her chest. Thank you for not leaving her words behind. Caleb could not speak for a moment. He only nodded. Inside the boarding house, Mrs. Vale made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Abigail sat by the window while Lily read the letter again, slower this time, with Caleb across the room giving her space. Outside, the feed store sign creaked in the wind. By late afternoon, Sheriff Maddox returned. His face was grave. Silas is in the jail, he said, but there is more. We searched his office, found a deed transfer unsigned naming Lily as Mary Bell's daughter. Seems Mary had sent proof once before, months ago. He kept it hidden. Lily's lips parted. The sheriff looked at Abigail. There may be inheritance rights, land may be money, it will take a judge. For the first time that day, Lily looked frightened of hope. Then Caleb swayed where he stood. Abigail rose quickly. Caleb. He put a hand to the table, but his knees bent. The long ride, the cold, the bruised ribs, and the weight of Mary's promise had finally taken what strength he had left. As Abigail reached him, he caught her wrist. Did we finish it? He whispered. She looked at Lily, at the cross, at the letter open beneath the lamp. Almost, she said. But his eyes closed before he heard the rest. Caleb did not wake until the next morning. He lay in a narrow bed at Mrs. Vale's boarding house, with clean bandages around his ribs and a quilt tucked to his chest. Pale sunlight rested on the wall. Somewhere below, dishes moved in the kitchen, and a woman laughed softly at something that was not quite funny but needed laughing at anyway. Abigail sat in the chair beside him, her hands folded in her lap. When his eyes opened, the first thing he did was look for the leather pouch. Abigail lifted it from the small table, still here. His gaze searched her face. Lily. She is downstairs with Mrs. Vale. She has read the letter 3 times and cried over it twice. Sheriff Maddox sent for the circuit judge. Silas will not walk out of this with only a sorry word. Caleb closed his eyes and let his head sink back. Mary asked me to put it in Lily's hand. You did. I almost failed. No, Abigail said. You almost died keeping a promise. That is not the same thing. He turned his face toward her. For once, there was no guarded look in him, no careful distance, only weariness and relief and something softer that had been growing between them since the night he came to her door. I saw your lamp, he said. I remember. I thought it was only shelter. His voice was weak but clear. I did not know it was the first kind thing that would lead to all the rest. Abigail looked down at her hands. They were rough hands, work hands, hands that had held reins, chopped wood, buried a husband, and opened a door in a storm. She had thought her life after Samuel would be only endurance, not joy, not new tenderness, just work, memory, and quiet. Then Caleb Rusk had knocked. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked. Lily appeared in the doorway, holding Mary's silver cross in one hand and the letter in the other. Her eyes were red, but she stood tall. I wanted to thank you while you were awake, she said. Caleb tried to sit up. Abigail pressed one hand to his shoulder and stopped him. Lily came closer. Mrs. Vale told me what happened on the ridge. Sheriff told me about the men at the barn. You both risked more than I knew. Abigail shook her head. Your mother risked the most. She told the truth when silence would have been easier. Her voice trembled, but she did not break. Caleb swallowed hard. She loved you fierce. Lily nodded, pressing the cross to her chest. I know that now. By afternoon, Pine Hollow had changed in the small ways towns change when a lie has been dragged into daylight. Silas Whitcomb's feed store stayed shut. Men who once tipped hats to him now crossed the street in silence. Elias Crow and the others gave statements to Sheriff Maddox, each one trying to save himself by speaking more truth than the last. The circuit judge arrived 2 days later. There would be hearings, papers, and months of legal questions, but the first ruling was plain. Lily Bell was Mary's daughter, and Mary's signed proof would be entered before the court. Silas's hidden deed and his hired threats would not be forgotten. Justice did not come like thunder. It came like a lantern being carried from room to room, showing what had always been there. When Caleb was strong enough to travel, Abigail prepared the wagon. Lily came to see them off wearing the silver cross around her neck. Mrs. Vale stood behind her with both hands on her shoulders. "I do not know what I will inherit," Lily said. "Maybe land, maybe trouble." "Most things worth having bring some trouble," Abigail said. Lily smiled through tears. "Then I will learn to stand under it." "You already have." Caleb handed her the empty leather pouch. "Your mother held this last. It should stay with you." Lily took it carefully, then stepped forward and kissed his cheek. Caleb looked so startled that Abigail nearly laughed for the first time in days. As the wagon rolled out of Pine Hollow, the church bell rang once. Not a warning this time, not an alarm, just one clear note over the roofs, as if the town itself was admitting it had heard the truth. If this ending touched your heart, remember Lily's courage and Abigail's open door. Sometimes one small kindness in a cold world becomes the road that leads someone back to their name. The ride home was slow, but the sky was clear. Snow shone on the ridges. Atlas pulled steady. Caleb sat beside Abigail with Samuel's coat over his shoulders, no longer wearing it like borrowed guilt, but like warmth that had been freely given. When the ranch house came into view, smoke rose from the chimney. Mr. Harlan had kept the place well. Rose nickered from the barn when she heard the wagon, and Caleb smiled in a way that made his whole face younger. That evening, Abigail made stew. She set 2 bowls on the table. Caleb noticed but said nothing at first. He washed his hands, moved slowly to the chair across from hers, and sat in the same place where he had once trembled beneath a wool blanket with snow melting from his sleeves. Outside, the wind touched the porch boards. Inside, the lamp burned steady. Abigail looked toward the window, where the cedar tree beyond the creek stood dark against the last light. Samuel rested there, beneath clean snow and honest sky. For the first time, she did not feel that loving what remained meant betraying what had been. Caleb followed her gaze. "He would have opened the door too," he said softly. "Yes," Abigail said, "he would have." The fire spoke low. The house, built for 2 and left lonely for years, seemed to settle around them with a deep and quiet peace. Abigail lifted her spoon, then paused. "Caleb." "Yes, ma'am." "When spring comes, the south fence will need mending." He looked at her, understanding slowly. "Is that an invitation?" "It is work," she said. "Do not make it fancier than it is." His smile came warm and careful. "Then I suppose I had better stay close enough to be useful." Abigail looked at him across the lamplight, across grief, across snow, across all the years she thought were finished with surprise. Outside, winter held the valley in white silence. Inside, 2 bowls steamed on the table, and the door that had opened in a blizzard stayed open to a new life.